The billionaire CEO said no kids. 5 years later he met his twins, and what happened next changed everything. She stood in his private study, 5 years of silence between them, and said the words that would destroy everything he thought he knew. They're 5 years old, Edwin. 5. Do the math. His face went pale as death. Mine? Biologically, yes. In every other way that matters, they're mine alone. You don't get to walk back into our lives just because you finally found out they exist. But Traci, I didn't know. Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. You didn't know because you made it very clear what would happen if I ever got pregnant. You had me sign a literal contract, Edwin. A relationship contract stating you would never, ever want children. So when I saw those 2 pink lines on that pregnancy test, I knew exactly what telling you would mean. You would have paid for the abortion, reminded me of our agreement, and made me feel like I was the one destroying everything. So I disappeared. I built a life without you. And now you think you can just decide you want to be a father because it's suddenly convenient? Have you ever had to face the person who completely shattered your heart? The one who made you choose between the love you felt and the future you deserved? Traci Gordon had 15 minutes before she'd walk into a ballroom filled with Seattle's tech elite and come face to face with Edwin Warren, the billionaire CEO who'd told her in no uncertain terms that children would never be part of his life. What he didn't know was that she'd spent the last 5 years raising the twins he never knew existed, building a $62 million company from nothing while being a single mother to 2 5-year-olds who had his eyes, his intelligence, and absolutely no idea their father was one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest. Tonight wasn't supposed to go this way. Edwin was supposed to be in Tokyo. Traci was supposed to accept her award for Gene Solutions, her groundbreaking genetic testing company that was changing lives for families with rare diseases, and leave before anyone connected the dots. But the universe had other plans. And when Edwin Warren walked into that ballroom and saw the children he'd spent his entire adult life swearing he'd never have, everything was about to change. If you've ever had to choose between protecting your heart and taking a risk on someone who hurt you, this story will hit differently. Hit that like button if you're ready for a journey about second chances, broken trust, and whether people can truly change. And subscribe because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Traci stepped off the private ferry onto Mercer Island with the kind of precision that comes from 5 years of doing everything alone. Perfectly, defensively, without room for error. The Seattle skyline glittered across Lake Washington behind her, all glass and steel and impossible promises she'd stopped believing in approximately 17 minutes after she'd walked out of Edwin Warren's penthouse and vowed never to look back. She wore black. Always black now. A tailored pantsuit that cost less than what her former self would have spent on coffee in a week, but fit better than anything money could buy because she'd learned to value function over flash, substance over sparkle. Her red hair, once long and wild the way Edwin had loved it, was cut in a sharp bob that meant business, not memories. The twins flanked her like small, fierce sentinels. Mason wore glasses he didn't really need, but insisted made him look more scientific. His dark hair was untamed, despite her best efforts that morning. His sister Riley had chosen her own outfit, rain boots, a tutu, and a NASA t-shirt, because apparently 5-year-olds didn't understand the concept of making good first impressions at tech industry galas. Mama, why do we have to go to this? Mason asked for the 8th time since they'd left their modest Ballard apartment that morning. His tone carried that edge of analytical skepticism he'd inherited directly from Traci and, though she hated admitting it, from Edwin too. I told you, baby. Mama's company is receiving an award. It's important. But we don't like parties, Riley added, holding tight to Traci's hand. They're loud and boring and the food is always weird. I know, sweetheart. But Elena will be there, and she promised to show you the dessert table first. There are chocolate fountains. That bought her approximately 30 seconds of peace as the twins exchanged glances, conducting some silent sibling negotiation about whether chocolate fountains compensated for the torture of formal events. The gala was being held at the Warren estate, because of course it was. The Pacific Northwest Tech Innovation Awards were sponsored by Warren Tech Industries, which meant Edwin's fingerprints were all over this evening, even if Traci had been assured he wouldn't personally attend. Too busy with the Tokyo acquisition, his assistant had said when confirming Traci's award. Mr. Warren sends his congratulations, but will be represented by his executive team. She'd been relieved. 5 years was long enough to build an empire from nothing, to raise twins alone, to transform from the naive biotechnology researcher who'd believed in love and partnership into the woman who'd founded Gene Solutions, a company now valued at $62 million, specializing in affordable genetic testing for rare diseases. 5 years was long enough to survive Edwin Warren. It wasn't long enough to face him. The estate sprawled across 6 acres of manicured waterfront property, all Northwest modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows and sustainable materials that probably cost more than sustainability should. Traci had been here before, of course, back when she'd believed she belonged in Edwin's world, when she'd thought their love story would end differently than it had. Not with her sobbing in a bathroom stall at SeaTac Airport, a positive pregnancy test in her shaking hands, and a one-way ticket to her sister's place in Portland where Edwin would never think to look. "Mama, you're squeezing," Riley whispered. Traci loosened her grip on her daughter's hand, forcing her breathing to steady. The twins didn't know about Edwin. They knew they had a father, somewhere, somehow, but Traci had kept the details vague, age-appropriate, waiting for the day when they'd be old enough to understand that sometimes love isn't enough when two people want fundamentally incompatible futures. Edwin had been crystal clear from their very first date. No marriage, no children, no compromises on the life he'd built. His childhood had been chaotic. Raised by a single mother who'd struggled with addiction, bounced between relatives, never stable, never safe. He'd clawed his way to success and promised himself he'd never create another life he might fail to protect. Never subject a child to the possibility of his inadequacy. Traci had said she understood, had believed she could accept those terms, had convinced herself that loving Edwin was enough, that she didn't need traditional futures or family dreams. And then 2 pink lines had demolished every careful compromise. They'd met at a biotechnology conference 6 years ago. She was presenting research on genetic markers for rare pediatric diseases. He was keynoting about the intersection of technology and healthcare innovation. Their eyes had met across a crowded reception, and something had clicked into place that felt like destiny. Their first conversation had lasted 4 hours. Their first date had stretched into a weekend. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Within 6 months, Edwin had presented her with the contract. "I need you to understand something about me," he'd said, sitting across from her at an expensive restaurant she could never have afforded on her researcher's salary. "I don't do traditional relationships. I've built my life very deliberately, and there are certain things I will never compromise on. Marriage isn't something I believe in, and children are completely off the table. If you're looking for that kind of future, I respect that, but I can't be the person who gives it to you." She'd been 28, and so in love it physically hurt. She'd looked at this brilliant, damaged man who was offering her honesty instead of false promises, and she'd made a choice she'd later regret. "I understand," she'd said. "I'm focused on my career anyway. I don't need a ring or a baby to be happy. I just need you." He'd smiled with such relief. They'd signed his relationship contract like it was a business agreement. Mutual commitment without legal entanglement. Exclusive partnership with clearly defined boundaries. No marriage. No children, no exceptions. For 2 years, it had worked. They'd built something beautiful within those constraints. He'd supported her research. She'd understood his demanding schedule. They'd created a life that felt complete even if it didn't look traditional. And then, she'd missed her period. The grand ballroom hummed with Seattle's tech elite. Venture capitalists in expensive casual wear. Startup founders who'd made their millions before 30. Established industry titans who still pretended to remember what scrappy innovation felt like. Traci navigated through them with practiced grace, the twins trailing behind, taking in everything with wide, intelligent eyes. "Traci!" Elena Martinez appeared through the crowd like a lifeline, her warm smile exactly what Traci needed in this moment. "You made it. And you brought my favorite scientists." "We're not scientists yet," Mason corrected seriously. "We're only 5. But I'm going to study marine biology, and Riley wants to be an astronaut, so we will be scientists eventually." "My apologies," Elena said solemnly. "Future scientists. That's much more accurate." She leaned close to Traci, her voice dropping. "The presentation is in 20 minutes. Your award is 3rd. I set up the kids in the library with tablets and snacks. They'll be more comfortable there than in the ballroom. You're a miracle worker. I'm a woman who understands that children and corporate galas don't mix." Elena's expression shifted slightly, something careful entering her eyes. "Traci, there's something I need to tell you." But before she could finish, a hush fell over the room. That particular kind of silence that happens when someone important enters a space, when power shifts the atmosphere. Traci turned, and there, Framed in the doorway like he'd been staged by a cinematographer stood Edwin Warren. He looked exactly the same. No, that wasn't true. He looked better, which seemed impossibly unfair. At 38, Edwin had aged the way wealthy men do when they have personal trainers and nutritionists and probably expensive skincare routines they'd never admit to. His dark hair showed just enough silver at the temples to suggest authority without age. His suit was impeccable. His posture radiated the quiet confidence of someone who owned rooms before even entering them. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Traci watched his professional smile falter, watched recognition hit him like a physical blow, watched 5 years of carefully maintained distance collapse in the space of a heartbeat. He started moving toward her through the crowd. People parted automatically because they always did for Edwin Warren. Traci felt panic rising in her throat because she wasn't ready. 5 years wasn't enough. She'd never be ready. "Mama?" Riley tugged on her hand. "You look scared. Is something wrong?" "Everything," Traci thought. "Everything is about to change." "No, baby," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everything's fine. Why don't you and Mason go with Elena to the library? I'll come get you after the awards." Mason was watching her with that too perceptive gaze he'd inherited from both his parents. "You're lying." Adults always use that voice when they're lying to make us feel better. "Mason," Traci, Edwin's voice, right behind her, deep and familiar and full of something she couldn't name. "I didn't know you'd be here. They told me you were receiving an award, but I assumed you'd send a representative." She turned slowly, keeping the twins slightly behind her in an instinctive protective gesture. "Edwin, I thought you were in Tokyo." "I was. I flew back this morning when I heard Gene Solutions was being honored. Your work on accessible genetic testing for rare pediatric diseases, it's groundbreaking. I wanted to congratulate you personally." His eyes kept dropping to the twins, who were peering around Traci with undisguised curiosity. She could see him doing the math, could watch the calculations happening behind his carefully neutral expression. "These are my children," Traci said, her voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "Mason and Riley. They're 5. The words hung in the air. 5 years old, which meant... "Can we talk?" Edwin asked quietly. "Somewhere private? I don't think..." "Please, Traci. 5 minutes." Before Traci could respond, Mason stepped forward with that directness that made him simultaneously her pride and her greatest challenge. "Are you our dad?" he asked, his voice clear and certain. "Mama said our dad lived far away and had important work, but she uses a different voice when she talks about you. The voice that means something hurt her a long time ago, and it still hurts now." Edwin looked like he'd been struck. His gaze moved from Mason to Traci to Riley and back to Mason. The silence stretched too long. First he started, then stopped. His composure, that legendary Edwin Warren control, cracked visibly. "I don't know how to answer that question. Yes or no seems pretty simple," Riley offered helpfully. "You either are or you aren't." "Biologically," Edwin said carefully, looking to Traci for permission to continue. "If what I think is true, then yes. But I only just found out you existed about 3 minutes ago, so I'm still..." He paused. "I'm still understanding what that means." Mason processed this with visible skepticism. "So, you didn't know we existed until right now?" "That's correct. Where were you?" "That's complicated," Edwin began. "Adults always say things are complicated when they don't want to explain." Mason cut him off. "I'm 5, not stupid." "You're absolutely right," Edwin said, looking genuinely impressed despite the tension. "You deserve a real answer. Your mother and I had a relationship that ended badly. When it ended, she made the decision not to tell me she was pregnant. That was her choice to make, and He glanced at Traci. "I'm trying to understand why she made it." "Because you made it very clear what would happen if I got pregnant," Traci said quietly. "We need to have this conversation, but not here, not in front of them." Elena, reading the moment perfectly, stepped forward. "Come on, future scientists. Let's go explore that library. I heard they have a whole section on ocean life, Mason. And Riley, I bet we can find some books about astronauts who also love to dance. But I want to know." Riley started. "Later, baby," Traci promised. "Go with Elena. I'll explain everything later." The twins allowed themselves to be led away, though both kept looking back at Edwin like they were trying to memorize his face. Once they were out of earshot, Edwin spoke first. 5 years, Traci. You've known for 5 years that I had children, and you never. Don't, she interrupted. Don't you dare make this about what I didn't tell you. We're going to have this conversation, but we're doing it somewhere private, not in the middle of your gala. My study, Edwin said. It's quiet. We won't be disturbed. Fine. Lead the way. They walked through the estate in tense silence. Traci was hyper-aware of everything. The click of her heels on marble floors. The familiar scent of Edwin's cologne that memory had somehow preserved perfectly. The curious glances from guests who sensed drama but didn't know its shape. The study looked exactly as she remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with first editions and technical manuals, and the kind of carefully curated collection that screamed wealth and taste. The 4th wall was entirely glass, overlooking Lake Washington as the sun began its descent, painting everything in gold and regret. Edwin closed the door behind them. The sound of it clicking shut felt final. They're mine, he said, turning to face her. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in that same measured tone he used in boardrooms when he'd already calculated the outcome. Biologically, yes, Traci replied. In every other way that matters, they're mine alone. Edwin moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. 5 years, Traci. You've known for 5 years that I had children, and you never. Why didn't you tell me? The question was so absurd she actually laughed, harsh and humorless. Are you seriously asking me that? You, the man who made me sign a literal relationship contract stating you would never want children? Who told me, explicitly, repeatedly, that if I ever got pregnant, you'd consider it a betrayal of our agreement? That was before. Before what, Edwin? Before it was real? Before they were actual human beings instead of hypothetical complications? You don't get to rewrite history now that it's convenient. He turned to face her. There was genuine pain in his expression, raw and unguarded in a way Edwin never allowed himself to be. Tell me what happened. Please, I deserve at least that. You deserve... Traci felt fury rising, hot and righteous, and 5 years in the making. You don't deserve anything. But I'll tell you anyway because they deserve a father who understands exactly what he missed. She crossed to the window, needing the distance, needing to look at something other than his face. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after we broke up. I was at the airport, flying to a conference in Portland, and I felt wrong. Sick and exhausted and strange. I took a test in the bathroom at SeaTac. When it came back positive, I stood there for 20 minutes, just staring at it, trying to figure out what to do. Her voice was steady, clinical, like she was recounting someone else's story. And I knew exactly what telling you would mean. You'd offer to pay for an abortion. You'd remind me of our agreement. You'd make it very clear that I was the one breaking the rules, causing the problem, destroying what we had. You'd probably be kind about it. That's the worst part. You would have been so reasonable and kind while making me feel like I'd betrayed you by getting pregnant. Traci, I would never have... Yes, you would have, she interrupted. Because that's who you were 5 years ago. Someone so terrified of your own childhood that you couldn't imagine any other possibility. Someone who valued control over connection, certainty over love. Edwin absorbed this like a physical blow. So you just... disappeared? I went to Portland, stayed with my sister, built gene solutions from her garage while pregnant with twins, which, let me tell you, is not recommended by any medical professional. I worked through morning sickness and swollen ankles and the absolute terror of doing this alone. Hashtag Part 2, second 2,500 words. I gave birth at a community hospital with Elena holding my hand because you weren't there and would never be there. I made that choice. I chose to protect them from rejection before they were even born. The words hung between them, heavy with 5 years of survival and struggle, and the kind of strength that comes from having no other choice. What are they like? Edwin asked quietly, his voice almost breaking. Mason and Riley. Tell me about them. It was such an unexpected question that Traci found herself answering honestly, without the defensive walls she'd prepared. Mason is brilliant, obsessed with marine biology and anything related to the ocean. He can tell you the scientific name of every Pacific Northwest sea creature and will correct your pronunciation if you get it wrong. He's serious and thoughtful, and sometimes too adult for his own good. Riley is chaos in human form. She wants to be an astronaut, ballerina, veterinarian, and sees no reason she can't be all three. She makes friends everywhere we go and believes in magic, even though her brother keeps explaining why it's scientifically impossible. They sound perfect, Edwin whispered. They are, and they're mine, Edwin. I built our life without you. I created stability and safety and love. All the things you said you couldn't provide. I did it alone because I had to, because they deserved better than a father who saw them as obligations instead of miracles. You're right. His voice cracked slightly. About all of it. 5 years ago, I was a coward. I let my past dictate my future. I convinced myself that not wanting children was a rational choice based on self-awareness, when really it was just fear dressed up as philosophy. And now? Traci challenged, turning to face him fully. Now that you've had 30 seconds to process this, you're suddenly ready for fatherhood? You think you can just decide to want them and it magically erases 5 years of absence? No, Edwin said firmly. I don't think it's that simple. But Traci, I've spent 5 years wondering what happened to you. Where you went, why you disappeared without explanation. I hired investigators. You what? I hired investigators, he repeated, looking almost ashamed. 3 months after you left, when you wouldn't return my calls, when your sister told me you never wanted to see me again. I needed to know you were safe at least. They told me you were in Portland, working on a startup, building something innovative. They never mentioned children. Because I made sure they wouldn't, Traci said. I used my maiden name for everything. Gordon instead of any name connected to you. I built my company quietly, carefully, staying off your radar until I was established enough that it wouldn't matter. And now Gene Solutions is going public in 3 months, which means media attention, background checks, investor scrutiny. Eventually someone will connect the dots. They'll figure out you're the twins' father. They'll dig into why I left Seattle 5 years ago pregnant and alone. So I came here tonight to see if you'd be reasonable about this, to give you the chance to be absent by mutual agreement instead of abandonment, to control the narrative before it controls us. The manipulation was elegant, and they both knew it. Traci was offering him an out dressed up as consideration. I don't want to be absent, Edwin said immediately. Mutual agreement or otherwise. I want to know them, really know them. I want to be their father if you'll let me try. You say that now, in this moment, with shock making everything feel urgent and important. But Edwin, fatherhood isn't a board meeting. You can't strategize it or delegate it or control the variables. These are children who need consistency, not a part-time parent who shows up when it's convenient for his schedule. I understand that. Do you? Because 5 years ago, you chose convenience over everything else. You chose the life you could control over the life we could have built together. What's different now? Edwin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Traci to the window and back again. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. Everything is different. 5 years ago, I was so focused on not becoming my father, on not failing the way he failed, that I couldn't see I was failing in a completely different way. I was letting fear make all my decisions, building an empire but living in an empty penthouse with no one who actually knew me. Working 80-hour weeks because it was easier than examining why I was so lonely. I don't need your therapy breakthroughs, Traci said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. I know. I'm not asking for your sympathy or forgiveness. I'm just trying to explain that the man you left 5 years ago isn't the man standing here now. I've done the work. Actual therapy. Not just breakthrough moments. I've examined why I was so terrified of fatherhood. And I've built a life that has room for more than just work. Pretty words, Traci observed. But I've heard your pretty words before. They didn't mean much when you were showing me relationship contracts and explaining why children would be a fundamental incompatibility. You're right not to trust me, Edwin acknowledged. Trust has to be earned, not demanded. So let me earn it. Let me get to know Mason and Riley gradually, carefully, in whatever way you're comfortable with. I'll prove myself through action, not promises. Traci studied his face, looking for signs of the man who'd hurt her, looking for cracks in this new version of Edwin Warren. All she saw was genuine vulnerability and something that looked like desperate hope. Tomorrow, she said finally, lunch at Green Lake Park, noon. We'll keep it casual, low pressure. If they're comfortable, you can talk to them. If they're not, you walk away and we try again another time. Their comfort is the only thing that matters. Agreed, Edwin said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you, Traci, for even considering this. I'm not doing it for you, she said honestly. I'm doing it for them. They deserve to know where they come from, even if it's complicated. Green Lake Park on a Sunday afternoon in October was quintessentially Seattle. Gray skies threatening rain that might never come. Families with dogs and strollers and the kind of casual outdoor enthusiasm that defined the Pacific Northwest. Traci had chosen this location deliberately. Neutral territory, public enough that nothing could get too intense, easy to leave if things went wrong. Edwin was already there when they arrived, standing by the lake in jeans and a simple sweater that made him look younger, less intimidating. He looked nervous, which was unsettling. Edwin Warren didn't do nervous. Ready? Traci asked the twins, who were watching Edwin with identical expressions of cautious curiosity. Ready, Mason confirmed. Is he going to be weird? Riley whispered. Adults are usually weird when they're trying to impress kids. Probably a little weird, Traci admitted. Try to be patient. They approached together, a unit. Edwin's face transformed when he saw them up close in daylight. Not filtered through ballroom crowds or study windows, but real and close and unmistakably his. Hi, he said, crouching down to their level. I'm Edwin. Your mom and I used to be very good friends, and I just found out that I'm your father, which is the best news I've had in 5 years. Why didn't you know before? Mason asked immediately, cutting through pleasantries with the directness of someone who valued facts over feelings. Edwin glanced at Traci, silently asking permission to answer honestly. She gave a slight nod. Because your mom and I wanted different things 5 years ago. I told her I never wanted to be a father, which was a stupid thing to say, but I believed it at the time. When she found out she was pregnant with you and Riley, she knew I'd be a terrible father if I didn't actually want to be one. So she left to build a life where you'd be safe and loved, even if it meant doing it alone. That's honest, Mason said, sounding surprised. I promised myself I'd always be honest with you, Edwin replied, even when the truth doesn't make me look good. Mama says honesty is more important than looking good, Riley chimed in. Also, I like your shoes. They're shiny. Edwin smiled, genuine and surprised, and absolutely delighted. Thank you. I like your rain boots. Are those dinosaurs? Space dinosaurs, Riley corrected. Because regular dinosaurs are extinct, but in space, maybe they evolved differently. That's actually a fascinating hypothesis, Edwin said seriously. Have you considered the atmospheric composition necessary for dinosaur-based evolution in zero gravity? And just like that, they were off. Riley explaining her elaborate space dinosaur theory, while Mason listened with visible skepticism, occasionally interjecting with actual scientific facts that Edwin engaged with rather than dismissed. Traci watched from a careful distance, ready to intervene but not interfering. Edwin was good with them. Patient, genuinely interested, treating them like small people with valid thoughts rather than children who needed to be managed. Can we feed the ducks? Riley asked after exhausting the space dinosaur topic. Do you have duck food? Edwin looked to Traci. Always, she confirmed, pulling a bag of appropriate duck food from her purse. We come here every Sunday. The twins have favorite ducks they've named. That one is Professor Quacksworth. Mason pointed to a particularly dignified mallard. And that's Duchess Fluffybottom. Riley named her. Excellent names, Edwin said solemnly. Very regal. They spent an hour at the lake, the twins gradually warming to Edwin's presence. He asked good questions, listened to their answers, didn't try too hard or make promises he couldn't keep. When Mason mentioned his marine biology obsession, Edwin admitted he'd considered marine engineering before going into tech. When Riley showed him her latest dance move, a spinning jump she'd invented herself, he applauded with genuine enthusiasm. He's better than I thought he'd be, Mason whispered to Traci during a moment when Edwin was helping Riley throw food to the ducks. He actually listens. Yeah, Traci agreed quietly. He does. By the time they left, the twins had extracted a promise that Edwin would attend Mason's school presentation on ocean acidification the following week. He'd agreed immediately, asking for the time and location without checking his schedule first. 6 months passed like a test. Traci kept waiting for Edwin to fail. But he didn't. He showed up to Mason's presentation, sitting in a too-small chair in a first-grade classroom, listening to his son explain ocean acidification with the seriousness of someone defending a dissertation. He attended Riley's dance recital, filming every second and applauding louder than anyone, when she forgot half her choreography and improvised an interpretive piece about space dinosaurs instead. He learned their routines. Mason liked his sandwiches cut diagonally, not straight across. Riley needed her bedtime story read in specific character voices, or she'd make him start over. They both had nightmares sometimes and needed different comfort. Mason wanted facts about why monsters weren't scientifically possible. Riley needed to be held until the fear faded. Edwin rearranged his life around their schedule. He attended parent-teacher conferences, contributed to classroom volunteer schedules, learned the names of their friends and teachers and the elaborate social politics of elementary school social circles. He video called 3 times a week, conversations that started awkward but became natural as everyone relaxed into this new dynamic. Mason would show him building designs through the camera. Riley would sing him songs she'd learned at school. They'd ask him questions about New York and his work, and whether he had any pets. "I don't," Edwin admitted during one call. "I travel too much. It wouldn't be fair to an animal." "You should get a fish," Riley suggested. "They don't care if you travel." "That's actually a great idea," Edwin said. "Will you help me pick one out when I visit?" "Yes. It should be purple." "Of course it should," Edwin agreed solemnly, and Traci found herself smiling despite her determination to remain neutral. Traci watched all of this with careful scrutiny, waiting for the moment when his commitment would waver, when work would take precedence, when the novelty would fade, when he'd revert to the man who'd once believed children were incompatible with the life he'd built. The moment never came. Instead, Edwin kept showing up, kept proving through daily small actions that he'd meant every word. "You're starting to trust him," Elena observed one evening after Edwin had left from another family dinner that had become routine. "I'm starting to not hate him," Traci corrected. "That's different." "Is it though?" Elena challenged gently. "Because I've watched you with him over the last 6 months. You smile more when he's around. You look forward to his visits. You check your phone more often on days he's supposed to call the twins. That's for them, not for me." "Sure," Elena said, unconvinced. "Keep telling yourself that." 4 months after that first park meeting, Edwin approached Traci with news that made her simultaneously furious and devastated and terrified. They were at his temporary apartment in Ballard. He'd been renting it for the past 3 months, unable to keep making the commute from Mercer Island multiple times a week. The twins were in the living room watching a documentary about bioluminescent jellyfish. Traci and Edwin were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. "I have some news," Edwin said, setting down the dish he'd been drying. "I've been restructuring my company, delegating more responsibilities to my executive team, and I've decided to sell the Mercer Island estate." Traci went very still. "Why?" "I'm buying a house in Ballard, 3 blocks from your apartment. Close enough to be present, but far enough to respect boundaries." "You're moving?" Traci tried to keep her voice neutral. "I'm relocating my life to be near my children," Edwin corrected. "Warren Tech can function without me physically in the Mercer Island office. I've set up a remote work arrangement, traveling to headquarters twice a month for essential meetings. The rest of the time, I'll be here. That's a massive change." "It's the right change," he said simply. 6 months ago, you told me to prove myself through action. So, I'm acting. I'm choosing them over convenience, over the life I'd built, over everything that felt safe but empty. Before we continue with what happens next, before I tell you about the conversation that changed everything between Traci and Edwin, I need to pause and speak directly to you. We're at the turning point in this story, the moment where promises either become reality or dissolve into disappointment. You've watched Edwin show up for 6 months. You've seen Traci's walls start to crack, but the real question is whether she can risk her heart again, whether someone who hurts you can truly change. If this story is hitting you right in the chest, if you're wondering whether you'd make the same choice Traci's about to make, I need you to do something. Share this with someone navigating their own impossible situation, someone deciding whether to trust again, someone wondering if people really can transform. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe Edwin's change is real? Have you ever seen someone truly become a different person? Your story matters. Your experience matters. And you're not alone in trying to figure out if second chances are brave or foolish. Traci studied him across the kitchen. Edwin looked different now, less polished, more present. He'd started wearing jeans more often, had let his schedule include gaps for spontaneity, smiled more easily and more often. He'd changed, not performatively, but fundamentally, and that terrified her more than his consistency had. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You spent years convinced you'd be a terrible father. What made you change your mind so completely?" Edwin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands like they held answers. Meeting them, he finally said, seeing Mason's face light up when he talks about bioluminescence, hearing Riley explain why astronaut, ballerina, veterinarian is a perfectly reasonable career combination, realizing that my fear of failing them was nothing compared to the actual failure of not being in their lives at all. You sound like a completely different person than the man I left 5 years ago. I am a completely different person, Edwin agreed. Therapy helps. So does having a reason to change that matters more than comfort or pride. I spent 33 years letting my childhood trauma dictate my future. I'm done with that. I'd rather risk failing at fatherhood than guarantee failure by never trying. Traci felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but shifting, making room for a possibility she'd forbidden herself from considering. The twins adore you, she said carefully. You've been everything I hoped you'd be as a father. Consistent, present, genuinely engaged. You've earned their trust, but not yours, Edwin observed. Trust isn't binary, Traci replied. I trust you with them. I've seen you prove yourself over and over, but Edwin, trusting you not to hurt me again, that's different. That's harder. I know, he said quietly. And I'm not asking for that trust. I'm just asking permission to keep showing up. For them, and if you ever want to explore what we could be now, as different people who've both changed, I'd like that chance. But only when you're ready. If you're ever ready. The honesty was disarming. No pressure, no timeline, no demands. Just patient, genuine desire wrapped in respect for her boundaries. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, Traci admitted. 5 years ago, you shattered something in me. I built walls to survive, and I'm not sure I know how to take them down without risking everything I've built. Then don't take them down, Edwin said, moving closer but not crowding her. Keep them up as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere. What if you didn't have to lose anything? He continued. What if instead of choosing between independence and partnership, we built something that honored both? I don't want to absorb your life into mine, Traci. I want to build a life together that makes room for everything you are. That's a pretty idea, she whispered. But real life is messier than pretty ideas. Then let's be messy together, Edwin replied. Let's figure it out as we go. Make mistakes, adjust, and try again. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm just asking for possible. Traci looked up at him. This man who'd broken her heart and then spent 6 months proving he'd learned how to handle it more carefully. This man who'd transformed his entire existence because 2 5-year-olds deserved a present father. This man who was looking at her like she was the answer to questions he'd spent years avoiding. I'm terrified, she admitted. Me too, Edwin said. Absolutely terrified. But I'm also hopeful. And I haven't felt hopeful about anything personal in 5 years. If we do this, Traci said slowly, if I let you in, really in, not just as their father but as my partner, you need to understand something. I'm not who I was 5 years ago. I'm harder, more independent, less willing to compromise my needs for someone else's comfort. I built an empire while raising twins alone. I don't need rescuing or completing. I know, Edwin said. That's one of the things I love about who you've become. You're stronger than you were, more certain, absolutely complete unto yourself. I'm not trying to rescue you, Traci. I'm asking if you'll let me stand beside you while you continue being extraordinary. The words hit her like a revelation, not completing her, but standing beside her. Not fixing what was broken, but celebrating what she'd built from the pieces. One chance, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You get one chance to prove this is real. If you hurt me again, if you let them down, there won't be another conversation. We'll be civil parents and nothing more. Understood. Understood, Edwin said seriously. I won't waste it. He moved even closer, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the evidence of time and change and growth that showed in both their faces. Can I kiss you? He asked. You're asking permission? Always, Edwin replied. For everything. No assumptions. No taking for granted. Just 2 people choosing each other deliberately, every single day. Traci closed the distance between them, answering with action instead of words. The kiss was different than she remembered. Less desperate, more grounded. Not 2 people trying to prove something, but 2 people who'd survived loss and built themselves back stronger, choosing to risk that strength on possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Traci was crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally letting go of walls that had become more prison than protection. "This is terrifying," she said again. "Absolutely terrifying," Edwin agreed. "Also wonderful. Can things be both?" "I think things are usually both," Traci replied. "Especially the things worth doing." They talked until past midnight, mapping out what this could look like. Not rushing into cohabitation or grand gestures, but taking it slowly, carefully, building trust in increments. Date nights when the twins were with Elena. Family dinners that acknowledged they were becoming something more than Keo parents. Honest conversations about needs and boundaries and the work of building partnership from fractured history. "I love you," Edwin said, as Traci prepared to leave. "I loved you 5 years ago, but I was too afraid to love you well. I love you now in a way that's braver and more honest. And I'll spend however long it takes proving I've learned the difference." "I love you too," Traci admitted. Again. "Still, it's terrifying and wonderful, and I have absolutely no idea how this ends." "Maybe that's okay," Edwin suggested. "Maybe not knowing is part of what makes it worth doing." The next morning, the twins returned from their sleepover, with Elena looking impossibly pleased with themselves. "Did you kiss?" Riley demanded immediately. "That's not an appropriate question," Traci started, but Mason interrupted. "Based on Mama's facial expression and the fact that she's been smiling at her phone for the last hour, I calculate a 94% probability of romantic escalation." "He's 5, Traci said to no one in particular. "How is he using phrases like romantic escalation?" "So, you did kiss," Riley crowed triumphantly. "Adults are allowed privacy," Traci tried. "But are you happy?" Mason asked, and the question was so genuine, so full of hope and concern that Traci felt her heart crack open a little wider. "Yeah, baby," she said, pulling both twins into a hug. "I'm happy, scared and uncertain and absolutely terrified, but happy." "Good," Riley declared, "because Edwin makes good pancakes and knows all the star constellations and laughs at my jokes. We should keep him." "I agree with Riley's assessment," Mason added solemnly. "He's a statistically significant improvement in our family structure."